The champagne glass shattered against the yacht's polished deck, its crystal fragments catching the golden sunset like scattered diamonds. 300 of society's most elite guests watched in stunned silence as the billionaire's wife screamed at the elegant black woman in the navy dress, "Security! Remove this impostor immediately." But what happened next would shatter more than just crystal. It would break every assumption they had about respect, service, and what it truly means to belong. The evening had started so differently. Admiral Rochelle Washington, though nobody knew her title yet, had arrived at the Golden Horizon Charity Gala with nothing but hope in her heart, and her late mother's vintage dress uniform-inspired gown flowing gracefully around her. At 35, Rocky had already accomplished more than most people dream of in a lifetime, but tonight she simply wanted to support the veterans' charity that meant everything to her. She had taken a modest water taxi to reach the massive yacht, watching as helicopters and private boats delivered other guests in obvious displays of wealth. Rocky's invitation was legitimate. She served on the charity's board of directors, but as she stepped aboard the gleaming vessel, she could feel the stares beginning. Her dress, while beautiful and meaningful, wasn't obviously expensive. Her transportation had been humble. In a sea of designer gowns and dripping diamonds, she stood out for all the wrong reasons, at least in the eyes of those who measured worth by price tags. Penelope Whitmore, wife of tech billionaire Harrison Whitmore, noticed Rocky immediately. Penelope had built her identity around exclusivity, around knowing exactly who belonged in her carefully curated world and who didn't. With her platinum hair swept into an elaborate updo and her neck adorned with pearls that cost more than most people's cars, Penelope approached Rocky with the predatory grace of someone accustomed to being society's gatekeeper. "Excuse me," Penelope's voice carried that particular tone of authority mixed with suspicion. "I don't believe we've met. How exactly did you receive an invitation to tonight's event?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and conversations around them began to quiet as other guests sensed drama brewing. Rocky turned with a genuine smile, extending her hand in greeting. "Good evening, I'm Rochelle Washington. Thank you for hosting such a beautiful event for the Veterans Charity. The cause means a great deal to me." Her voice was warm, professional, and carried an underlying strength that should have been a warning to anyone paying attention. But Penelope wasn't listening to the strength. She was cataloging what she saw as inadequacies. The dress that wasn't this season's designer piece, the absence of obvious jewelry, the water taxi arrival she'd been informed about. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to need to see your invitation," Penelope announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "We've had issues with people trying to crash our exclusive events." The words hit the gathering like a cold wave. Phones discreetly emerged from purses and pockets as guests sensed they were witnessing something that might go viral. Rocky reached into her simple clutch and produced her formal invitation, the heavy cardstock embossed with gold lettering. She handed it over calmly, though those watching closely might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. Penelope examined the invitation with theatrical skepticism, turning it over in her hands. "This could easily be forged," she declared, loud enough for half the party to hear. "The paper quality seems different, and honestly, I don't remember approving your name for the guest list." The lie came easily to her lips, spoken with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her cruelty. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Some guests looked uncomfortable, sensing they were witnessing something wrong, but most were too caught up in the drama to intervene. In their world, scenes like this were entertainment, and they had their phones ready to capture every moment. "Ma'am," Rocky said quietly, her composure remarkable, despite the growing humiliation, "I assure you my invitation is legitimate. I'm here solely to support the Veterans Charity. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding." She attempted to retrieve her invitation, but Penelope pulled it away. "No, I don't think there has been a misunderstanding at all." Penelope's voice grew sharper, more cutting. "I think you saw an opportunity to social climb, to get close to people with real influence and money. This dress," she gestured dismissively at Rocky's gown, "looks like something from a discount store. And arriving by water taxi, please." Everyone here arrived by helicopter or private boat. The cruelty in her words was breathtaking. Rocky felt each syllable like a physical blow, not because she was ashamed of her choices, but because she was witnessing the very prejudice that the veterans she served faced every day. Men and women who had sacrificed everything for their country, only to return home and be judged by their bank accounts rather than their service. "Security!" Penelope called out, her voice carrying across the deck. "I need someone to verify this woman's credentials. I believe we may have an imposter at our event." Two uniformed security guards approached, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but bound by their employment to respond. The crowd had grown now, forming a loose circle around the unfolding drama. Rocky stood in the center, dignified despite the humiliation, while Penelope orchestrated what amounted to a public trial. "Check her purse," Penelope demanded. "See if there's anything else that doesn't belong to her." This was the breaking point. Rocky had endured the questioning, the accusations, the public mockery, but being treated like a common criminal in front of hundreds of people pushed her to her limit. For the first time that evening, her careful composure cracked slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made several guests step back. "I am a guest at this event. I am here legally and legitimately. I've answered your questions and provided my invitation. I will not be searched like a suspected thief." "You will if you want to stay on my yacht," Penelope shot back, emboldened by what she saw as Rocky's defiance. "This is a private event on a private vessel. You follow my rules or you leave." The standoff stretched for long moments, the only sounds the gentle lapping of waves against the yacht's hull and the distant music that now seemed grotesquely cheerful. Rocky stood her ground, but the pain in her eyes was visible to anyone who cared to look. She was seeing the worst of humanity on display, the casual cruelty that privilege could afford. Then, cutting through the tension like a blade, came a voice from the back of the crowd. "Admiral Washington. Is that you?" The voice belonged to a young man in a wheelchair, wearing his dress uniform with visible pride despite the injuries that had ended his active duty. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres had been the evening's guest of honor, invited to speak about the charity's impact on wounded veterans. The effect of his words was instantaneous and electric. The crowd fell into complete silence, the kind of quiet that comes when everyone realizes they may have witnessed something terrible. Penelope's face went white as the title, Admiral, registered with the guests around her. "Admiral?" someone whispered from the crowd. "Did he say Admiral?" Rocky's eyes found Michael across the gathering, and for the first time that evening, she smiled genuinely. "Hello, Michael. It's good to see you again." Her voice carried across the silent deck, and those closest to her could hear something in her tone that they had missed before, the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. Michael began wheeling his chair through the crowd, which parted automatically before him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice growing stronger, "you're looking at Admiral Rochelle Washington, United States Navy. She's the woman who saved my life and the lives of 46 other sailors during the terrorist attack on our base in Syria 3 years ago." The revelation hit the crowd like a physical force. Phones that had been recording for entertainment were slowly lowered as the magnitude of their mistake became clear. Penelope stood frozen, the forged invitation accusation dying in her throat as she began to understand what she had done. "Admiral Washington," Michael continued, his voice carrying pride and respect, "received the Medal of Honor for her actions that day. She's also the youngest woman ever to achieve 4-star rank in the United States Navy, and she currently serves as our Director of Veterans Affairs." Each word fell into the silence like a stone into still water, creating ripples of shock and shame throughout the gathering. As if summoned by his words, the sound of helicopters filled the air above them. But these weren't the luxury aircraft that had been ferrying guests all evening. These were military helicopters, their rotors beating in the precise formation of an honor flyover. The crowd looked up instinctively and then back at Rocky, who stood in the center of their circle with quiet dignity. From the yacht's upper deck, naval officers in dress uniform began to appear, They had been part of the evening's planned ceremony, scheduled to present colors during the charity presentation. But seeing their former admiral being humiliated by civilians, they had moved to intervene. The senior officer, a captain whose chest displayed decades of service ribbons, called out in a voice that carried across the entire yacht, "Attention on deck!" Every military person present, including Michael in his wheelchair, immediately came to attention. The civilians watched in confusion and growing awe as the captain continued, "All personnel, render honors to Admiral Washington." The salute was instantaneous and perfectly executed. Every naval officer aboard raised their right hands in crisp military precision, holding the gesture with the respect reserved for the highest-ranking leaders. The helicopters overhead dipped in acknowledgement, their formation perfect against the darkening sky. The silence that followed was profound. 300 of society's most privileged individuals stood witnessing something they had never seen before. True respect, earned through service and sacrifice, displayed with military precision. Many had never been in the presence of such authentic honor. Rocky returned the salute with the practiced ease of someone who had earned the right to receive such tribute, and then did something that surprised everyone present. She stepped forward and addressed the crowd, not with anger or recrimination, but with the wisdom of someone who had learned to find teaching moments in even the darkest experiences. "Thank you all for your attention," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the deck. "I want to address what happened here tonight, not because I need vindication, but because there's an important lesson in this moment." She turned slightly to include Penelope in her gaze, though her expression held no malice. "Every day, veterans return from service and face the same assumptions that were made about me tonight. They're judged by their clothes, their transportation, their bank accounts, rather than their service and sacrifice. Some of them struggle with invisible wounds. Others, like Michael here, bear visible reminders of their service. All of them deserve better than to be reduced to superficial judgments." The crowd was captivated now, not by drama, but by genuine leadership. Rocky continued, "Mrs. Whitmore made assumptions about me based on how I looked and how I arrived. But the real tragedy isn't what she assumed about me. It's what those same assumptions mean for the thousands of veterans who don't have rank or recognition to protect them from such treatment." Harrison Whitmore, who had been notably absent during his wife's display of cruelty, appeared from the yacht's interior, his face a mask of mortification and anger. He approached Rocky directly, ignoring his wife completely. "Admiral Washington," he said, his voice carrying to the crowd, "I offer my deepest apologies for what you've endured tonight. There is no excuse for such behavior." Without waiting for her response, he turned to address the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am making an immediate donation of $10 million to the Veterans Charity in Admiral Washington's honor. Furthermore, I'm establishing a new foundation dedicated to combating the discrimination that our service members face when they return home." His words triggered something unexpected, a wave of spontaneous giving that swept through the crowd. Guests began calling out donations, each trying to distance themselves from the shameful display they had witnessed and participated in through their silence. In the span of 10 minutes, more money was raised for veterans' causes than the charity had seen in its entire previous year. But Rocky wasn't finished. As the donation announcements died down, she pulled out her phone, which had been buzzing insistently throughout the confrontation. The caller ID showed simply POTUS, the President of the United States. "I apologize," she said to the crowd, "but I need to take this call. It was scheduled for this evening, though the timing seems rather appropriate now." She answered with a professional, "Good evening, Mr. President," her words carrying clearly in the silent air. The conversation was brief but audible to those nearby. The president's voice, recognizable to many in the crowd, came through clearly. "Admiral Washington, I'm calling to formally offer you the position of Secretary of Defense. Your country needs your leadership now more than ever." Rocky's response was equally clear. "Mr. President, I accept. It would be my honor to serve." The call ended, and Rocky looked up at a crowd that was now staring at her with something approaching awe. She had gone from being treated as an unwelcome intruder to accepting the highest defense position in the nation, all in the space of an hour. In the months that followed, the story of that evening became legend. The video footage, initially recorded for entertainment, became a viral sensation that sparked national conversations about respect, service, and the invisible barriers that veterans face. Rocky's confirmation as Secretary of Defense was unanimous, with Michael Torres delivering powerful testimony about her character and leadership. The Golden Horizon incident, as it came to be known, became a case study in military academies and business schools alike. It demonstrated how quickly respect could be earned or lost, and how true leadership revealed itself not in moments of triumph, but in moments of unfair adversity. Penelope Whitmore found herself socially exiled from the circles that had once welcomed her. Her actions that night had been too public, too cruel, and too widely broadcast for forgiveness. She spent her remaining years in isolation, a cautionary tale about the price of prejudice and the danger of judging others by surface appearances. For Rocky, the evening became a defining moment not because of the humiliation she endured, but because of how she chose to respond. She turned a moment of personal attack into a teaching opportunity for an entire nation. Her grace under pressure, her dignity in the face of cruelty, and her wisdom in victory became the qualities that defined her tenure as Secretary of Defense. The lesson of that evening resonated far beyond the privileged world of yacht parties and charity galas. It reminded everyone who heard the story that respect isn't about designer clothes or expensive transportation. It's about recognizing the quiet heroes who walk among us, often unrecognized and unappreciated. True nobility, as Admiral Washington proved that night, comes not from looking down on others, but from lifting them up. And sometimes the person you're attempting to underestimate might just be the one person in the room who has literally taken a bullet for your freedom. The next time you see someone who doesn't fit your expectations, remember Admiral Washington's story. Remember that you might be looking at a hero, and remember that respect, once lost through cruelty and prejudice, is nearly impossible to reclaim.